Hey guys, welcome back. So a question I often get asked is which Sicilian defense should I be playing? So I've put together this video with the pros and cons of each one so you get a rough idea of what to expect. Also stay until the very end and I'll give you my top 3 picks for Sicilian defense repertoires. So let's jump right into the list. Okay, so let's kick this Sicilian list off with the first one. The Taimanov happens after e6, d4 captures, and black will play the move knight to c6. This is one of my personal favorite Sicilians, and it's sort of a more solid version of the Khan. However, white has a few very dangerous lines against it, and there's many options for white here, but it definitely deserves to go near the top. The next one is the O'Kelly. This one is one of the options for black where it's not good for white to go into an open Sicilian with d4. Because if white plays d4 here, black will capture, play e5, after knight b3, black has the move knight to f6, and if white goes knight to c3, then black will play the move bishop to b4, and already black has a really nice Sicilian. However, if white knows what he's doing, he won't go into an open Sicilian and just opt for pawn to c3 or pawn to c4 earlier on instead. Therefore, I would put the O'Kelly in the just tricks pile. Next one is the classical. Classical is very flexible opening, and it can be played at all levels. There's a few different move orders you can get to, but this is one of the most popular ones. Happens after knight to c6. We can transpose into similar structures as a Najdorf, even a Dragon or Scheveningen, and overall it's just a very good quality opening. So I would put it at the very top. Next we have the Nimzowitsch. This is not as popular as the other ones. It happens after knight to f6. The idea is that black will follow up with the move pawn to d5, depending on what white plays. If white plays e5, then the knight will obviously go to d5. And this one I would say is more of a tricky opening. It works well in faster time controls. Next one we have the Scheveningen. This I would consider more of the structure because you can get it from many different move orders. The only thing with the Scheveningen is I wouldn't go into it from the main move order, or I don't like to go into it from the main move order, since after the move pawn to d6 here, white can play the very dangerous pawn move pawn to g4. And now we get into a Kira's attack, which is extremely dangerous for black. But if you play into a Scheveningen from a different move order, then I would say it's perfectly okay. And I would definitely put it at the very top. So next we have the Sicilian, one of my personal favorites, which is the Khan. Happens after knight f3 e6, d4 takes, and then pawn goes to a6, and I often put the queen on c7, followed by either pawn to b5, bishop b7, and it's just a very flexible opening. But I would say there are times when it can get extremely sharp and uncomfortable when white is pushing a lot of pawns on your king side. It's definitely a little bit less sound than the Taimanov, but it can be played at a high level. So next opening we have on the list is the Kupreichik. Happens after d6, captures, knight c3, bishop to d7. This is sort of a very sophisticated waiting move for black, where he's looking to see what setup white chooses and then change his accordingly. It does require you to know a lot more setups as black here and be flexible, but overall it's definitely a playable option. The next one we have is the pin variation. Takes place after e6. Knight goes to f6, knight c3, black will play the move bishop to b4. Here white can gain an advantage if he does know what he's doing, but it's definitely a good surprise weapon and it can catch some opponents off guard. So I put it at the bottom here. The next one we have is the four knights. The four knights takes place after, usually black will play the move knight to c6 instead, and we'll get from this move order. After knight c3, black will play the move pawn to e6. And here white can play any number of moves, including knight to b5 and knight takes c6. I don't think it's that good as a main weapon. Next one we have is the Paulsen-Basman. I believe this one is after d4, knight takes, and bishop to c5. So I don't think there's anything special with this particular opening, and I think white can get a very comfortable advantage. I put it a bit lower here on the list. And now we get into one of the main openings, which is the Najdorf. Captures, and black will play a6. Of course, this is one of the best openings in chess, but it's also one of the most difficult openings in chess to learn, and it deserves to be at the very top, of course. The next one is the b6 variation. So after knight f3, black will play the move b6 here. So there's some flexibility to this move, but I think there's just a lot of better options on this list, and I don't think it's that high. So next one on the list is the Hedgehog, which is more of a setup than anything else. It often comes from ones where white is opting for Maroczy bind, trying to constrict black. We often get positions with less space and very, very cramped, but we get a lot of dynamic potential and tactical possibilities later on. It's definitely a very good opening. Some people love it, some people hate it. So I would put it in the champion tier. The next one is the hyper accelerated dragon. Black will play the move pawn to g6 immediately here. One of the downsides is that white doesn't have to go into the d4 pawn structures. He can opt for the move pawn to c3 as well as pawn to c4. So because of this, I put it a little bit lower than the other ones, but it's definitely a respectable opening. And the next one is the accelerated dragon. Black will play knight to c6, d4 captures, and then pawn to g6. Again, a very solid and good opening, except that the only downside is it allows the Maroczy bind. So if you don't like playing against the Maroczy, then you shouldn't go for this opening. Next we have the mainline dragon, which takes place after d6 move order, captures, pawn to g6. This is a very aggressive option, and it's a very good option if you like counterattacking, but because of the Yugoslav attack, you will have to know a lot of theory here to navigate your way safely through. But it's definitely a high tier opening. So next one we have is the Kveinis. So there's a lot of different tricky move orders in the Sicilian. This one happens after d4 takes, and black will play the move queen to b6. But I'm not a particular fan of this particular move order here, queen to b6, because white has a very strong response. I believe it's bishop to e3 is one of them among many. And if we capture the pawn on b2, white can just sacrifice it and play the move knight to d2. And I believe this is extremely dangerous for black. So I'm not a big fan of this opening at all. I put it probably close to the bottom. So the next one is the Godiva. I like this move order a lot more. So after knight to c6, captures, the queen goes to b6. We're actually hitting the knight here on d4, so we're forcing the knight to move to maybe a less optimal square on b3. And definitely this is a lot more playable. Next we have is the Dragondorf. So Dragondorf is sort of like a mixture between the dragon and Najdorf. There's really nothing wrong with this opening, and it's just perfectly playable. Next we have is the Kalashnikov. Happens after knight c3, captures, and black will play the move pawn to e5. So this is a very good option as well for players who like similar structures to the Sveshnikov. Often black will delay developing his kingside knight though and put it to either e7, sometimes even push the pawn to f5. It's definitely a good opening we can consider playing, though it's not very common. So I would put it maybe at the back of the respectable pile. And lastly we get the Sveshnikov, which happens after knight f3, knight c6, d4 captures, the black knight goes to f6, knight c3, and black will play the move pawn to e5 here. The game will often continue knight to b5, d6. And then black gets these weaknesses on the light squares, but in return we get a lot of dynamic compensation and attacking opportunity. So this is a very good opening just in general for players who like more aggressive style of play and are willing to play around the weaknesses. So that concludes my picks for my favorite Sicilians on this tier list. Of course, everything in the champion and god tier would be perfectly playable as a standalone Sicilian on its own, but it's also fun to mix and match and try different ones together. And I've suggested a few of my favorite combinations, and as well as ones which complement each other above. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you on the next one.